Okay, my turn. Thank you, Marta and April. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to share my research with you in this very thought-provoking seminar, and it led me to reflect on this long-standing collaboration with Omiec and my position as a researcher. So I aim at 40 minutes so that we have time for discussion. And so, yeah, please, if you have any clarification question, you can interrupt me. Otherwise, keep your questions till the end. And if there's something I said too quickly, or you want to dive in some specific topic more in depth, let me know. I'll be happy, because I can talk for hours about my research topic, as you probably know. Since the late 1980s, so OMIECH is the Organization of Indigenous Midwives and Indigenous Doctors of Chiapas, Organización de Médicos Indígenas del Estado de Chiapas in Mexico. And their goal is to preserve and revive traditional medical knowledge. And they have been doing this since the late 1980s, and I will discuss today two specific, I haven't spoken English in a while as well, so excuse me for the mistakes, but I wanted to share with you two specific struggles. One is more on the history. I will dive into the history of midwifery to understand the contemporary struggles and the types of knowledge that are at risk in midwifery. But I will also share an example of struggles around medical knowledge in general, and specifically the plants, the plant use, which are central to traditional medicine and biomedicine as well. And that's where the power struggle comes in. So these are the two topics that I would like to discuss with you today. Okay, so how do I change that? Okay, so but first, where is Chiapas? Because I assume not everyone knows. So I work in the state of Chiapas, which is on the red state in the map. It's in southeastern Mexico. It's a state that is at the border with Guatemala. And briefly, but historically, Chiapas has belonged to Guatemala, and then back to Mexico. So it's part of culturally, it's the Maya area. So the Maya in Mexico live currently in the Yucatan Peninsula, which is you can see in the Caribbean Sea, in the state of Chiapas. And then in Guatemala, it's also a Mayan population, but like just in Chiapas, there are 13 Maya languages. So it's a very diverse ethnic group. There are some common histories, mythology, but different languages, different forms of relating, of living, etc. So I worked more specifically, and that's the second map you can see on the right, in the highlands of Chiapas, around San Cristobal de las Casas. And they're more Tzeltal and Tzotzil ethnic group. And so Tzeltal and Tzotzil are two Maya languages that have some resemblance, but they're two different languages. And that's where San Cristobal de las Casas is a historical colonial town. It's a tourist area, and that's where the organization has its headquarters, OMIECH. And the organization has a museum, the Museum of Maya Medicine. And so it generates income by tourists visiting the museum. It also has a pharmacy or herbalist shop, so where they also they sell some plants, some remedies to everyone. And there are also the offices, and that's where for example, the women and midwives section is where I conducted my research. That's where the office is. And then what the organization does is that they organize workshops in different areas of the state. So on the map, in red is San Cristobal de las Casas, but then they also go more in the Lacandon jungle. They go in different areas where there are communities that have joined the organization. And I will detail a little bit more what the workshops are about, but that's to give you an idea of where I've been working. And something also about the state of Chiapas is that it's one of the states with a high indigenous population. In Mexico, indigeneity is defined as speaking a language which comes with its own limits, because there, like in all other colonized country, there are some people who didn't want to speak their language to their children because they face discrimination. But so the population is estimated 1/4 of indigenous population in Chiapas, but that's only based on the language definition. But there are actually anthropologists think that there are still more, even though the proportion is shrinking. And it's Chiapas is the poorest state of the country, so that's where it has the highest rate of poverty and extreme poverty. That's 3/4 of the population. And every time there's a census, we're looking at the data, and in 10 years, like it's still the poorest state. It's a highly mountainous region, and there are some regions where there are some areas of the state where there are no hospital access, where people don't have access to basic commodities. So there are great disparities between the urban centers and the very rural or jungle areas. And I have worked on maternal health policies, and so it's the state with the highest maternal mortality rate of the country. So it's 58 per 100,000 live birth, 58 deaths, which is not, like, for example, as high as in other countries like Tanzania, or where other colleagues are conducting work. But for Mexico, it's where it's the highest. And so that's about 12 women which die every year in Chiapas during pregnancy or 40 days after birth. That's how we calculate maternal mortality. And so in my research, sorry, I also have a sore throat. In my research, I have investigated what does that mean? Why is how are maternal health policies designed? And the focus is often on, we have to send women to the hospital, but that's not a solution if we don't look at the structural violence that these women live at, the lack of access to clean water, to food, et cetera, et cetera. And so, as you can see on the map, it reads the percentage of the population which is in extreme poverty in 2015 in Chiapas, and you see that the majority of the state are within poverty or extreme poverty, and the only place where it doesn't happen is in the capital region in Tuxtla. So that's the context. I also want to add that Chiapas in 1994 has been the place where indigenous peasant people have risen have risen and said ya basta, which means that's enough of poverty, enough of marginalization. And that's the Zapatista movement, inspired by Emiliano Zapata, which was the leader of the Mexican Revolution in 1910. So that called Neo-Zapatismo. And so the Zapatista movement is still very much alive and has made headlines all around the world. And there has been a huge solidarity movement, and there are still groups of solidarity across the world. And that has shown, Chiapas on the global stage. And in response, there has been an increased militarization, and there are still some military bases throughout the state. So it's called a low intensity warfare, and it's still the state that people live in. And with the pandemics, all these, everything else that I've told you is still very much real, and the lack of access to care has been highlighted during the COVID pandemics and the isolation of some communities. So that's for the general context. And of course, I have to say, where do I speak from? So thank you for introducing me. You said I was a medical anthropologist, and I live in Paris, in the Paris area. And I'm a French-Moroccan anthropologist. So and I have done my PhD in the US. So I have a different, different gaze. I have the gaze of, trained in a French institution with a French anthropology background, very heavy theory. And then I also have the background of having grown up partly in Morocco, in a colonized country, having questions myself about the relationship between France and its colonies, studying in the US, where I learned a lot from the activism, from all the decolonial studies and critical colonial studies, which is still very complicated to work on today in France. And so, and when I arrive in Mexico, I am white, which is something that I have to take into consideration. People see me as they don't call me gringa, but there's something about this. I have curly hair, so it's like it brings attention, but I have more power, I have more money, I'm in this status. But I also work on maternal health, and I'm on the field. When I started my field work, I was single, I was not a mother, and I was just traveling alone. Then I was married but still traveling alone. Now I have a child, and so all these status, but I was allowed to access some space and some information that women, indigenous women my age, my status, would have not been able to access, or men wouldn't have been able to access some information about reproduction and birth. So that's how I conducted my research, and I felt that it was important to build, not only to share the results, which is for me the basic, but also to think about the research project with some people working on this topic in Mexico, in the region. And so I worked with OMIECH because they were looking for a trainee, basically, and they were interested in the doctoral students who would write on midwives. And I was interested in women's rights, and then I started reading about midwifery, and there was a match, and I met them, and it worked. And sometimes it doesn't work. I've seen them like say no to anthropologists. So it was very a particular match, and I think that's important. And so we discussed the themes of the research, and I had some things on my agenda, and they had on their agenda, and so we found a common ground. And I'm referring to an article that I published last year on finding common ground. So I'll share the link with the research seminars participants. And after doing my research, my doctoral research on midwifery, I got a grant to do a 2-year postdoctoral study on environmental health, because the midwives were telling me we're seeing new diseases. The women, they don't eat like before. They were talking a lot about the environment, the changing, the mines. Chiapas is a place where there are 70 mine authorization permit constructions. So I decided to explore this theme, and from the midwife's point of view. And for me, the midwives are really central to my work, because they embody care. They care for everyone. They care for women and the families. They treat children's disease, and they care for the plants, because the plants are important to cure, and they care for the farm animals in rural areas. So they're really, for me, there's something to research. And now my postdoc is over, and I'm trying to find funding for this project on care, environmental, and also around birth. And so what I wanted to add is, yes, and so the plants at first, when I arrived at OMIECH, they were like, okay, you can talk about the midwives, but not about the plants. Because we've been involved in a project around plants, patenting plants, and we know it's a very sensitive topic. So I knew they were in a fight, and I will detail to you. I will give you the details later, but. So I was like, okay, I don't want to learn anything about plants. I'm here to work with the midwives. I don't want to do this thing where I extract the knowledge and then share it. But at the same time, they were publishing stuff about plants. And so the midwives, as you know, one of the methods, I don't have something on the methods, but is participant observation. So like I was with the midwives, and I prepared, the teas, and I was a helper. And they were scolding me because I wouldn't remember the plants. They were like, but I told you it's the plant that looks like that. But I just blanked. Like I was so afraid of doing some form of pillage, of committing this, that I wouldn't get. And now I'm working on the environment, but now we know each other. We've known each other it's going to be 10 years soon. And so I'm at a different place, and our relationship between OMIECH and me, and also me as a researcher. So there's something interesting that I now I'm back at the environment, and because it's crucial. Um, I wanted to do a brief overview, and I have notes here, but I'm not reading them. I hope I'm making sense. I just want to explain briefly how midwives work and the kind of historical tensions around midwifery in Mexico. Uh, Birth used to happen at home. If you look at the national stats, it's 98% of births in Mexico that happen in the hospital. So that's similar to France, to the US, to not sure about Finland, but something like that, right? But then it's such a big country, and as I highlighted when I talked about Chiapas, with so many disparities, that you have to look into the details. And so in Chiapas, in Oaxaca, in Guerrero, in the rural states, it's not 98% of birth that happen in the hospital. In the rural areas, it's quite the opposite. It's some researchers estimate that midwives attend midwives at home, indigenous midwives attend 50 or 75% of birth. And sometimes, like, I know of communities where it's 7 hours to the nearest health facility. So they attend 98% of birth. So that's why I love also anthropology, is that we look into the details and we look at people's stories, and then we can see, okay, so what's behind these statistics. And so birth still happens at home in rural areas. And so you have here a picture of so you can see a picture of indigenous midwife, a Tzeltal midwife, who is in her home, and her neighbor, so I was staying with her, and her neighbor, who was pregnant with her 5th child, I think, came for a visit. And what's interesting is that the midwife has a stethoscope. So she is listening to the heartbeat, and then she gives her a belly massage to position the fetus. And that's one of the skills that midwives have. They know how to position the baby, and then they can also massage other parts that are sore, and they give advice about what to eat, what to drink during the pregnancy. And so the women, they see the midwife usually after the first 3 months of not having their period, so into the 2nd trimester. And then they follow them, and the midwives are their neighbors or extended family. So they know how these women live. They know what they can access and what they cannot access, despite, international recommendations. And so I draw attention that the midwife here has a stethoscope, because there have been, since the mid 20th century, some trainings for midwives, because midwives have been identified as key actors or actresses for by international organizations, as the one who can reach the women that doctors or hospitals cannot reach. And so they have been attending trainings, and so their practice is still hybrid. I mean, it's, as you know, it's difficult. What is tradition is something that I'm also looking at, and tradition is dynamic, and so, like, midwives just mix and match and take the tools, the biomedical tools that they think will help them and the women they care for. And on the right is a drawing by Alice Bafouin, who illustrated some of the work of Omiech. And here it's a drawing of a birth, a home birth, a vertical birth. So the usual position is that the husband or the father-in-law or a woman, another adult, is sitting on a chair, and the person who is giving birth just is facing them on her knees, and holding herself to this husband or other adult, and the midwife is behind and catches the baby. And what is interesting in this picture is that everyone's wearing clothes, and also in the consult, in the picture that I took, so in the drawing and in the picture. So women are not naked. There's really something very important about not being cold during birth, and so there's also how do you say? What's the word? The sense of shame, right, is respected. And so this contrasts highly with hospitals, where even just if you go for a prenatal checkup, there are chances that you're gonna undress at some point. And for birth, women are naked in hospital gowns, and so that's also something that comes out if you look at women's stories about birth in the hospital and what was not all right for them. And so the training of midwives, let me see, it started, as I said, there since the 1950s, 1940s, it started already. It comes back to the late colonial era with the idea of we need the rise of training doctors in Europe, and then it was also the case in Mexico. And so doctors needed to practice, they needed women, and to get women, they went to the midwives. And so the idea that it is a market, that birth is a market, and so to let doctors have access to women, then they needed to control the midwives. I'm very, briefly, but just to focus on the contemporary training, these trainings still happen. And so on the left, you have a picture of a meeting I participated with midwives, Celtal midwives, and they have to sign and say they were at the meeting. And then on the right is a drawing that is on a mural in a hospital, and it's written in Celtal, and it's about high risk birth. And so it's written like what are the symptoms of basically eclampsia. So your head hurts, or your eyes, see, or you have bleeding. And so this is directed towards the women or the midwives. And what's interesting is that most Indigenous women in rural areas don't know how to read or write. So they're asked to sign forms, either when they attend trainings or when they have to deliver a birth certificate, or they have these messages in Celtal, but it doesn't matter that it's in Celtal. They speak Celtal, but it's not, the Celtal has been institutionalized, and now I took Celtal classes, but that's, since the colonization and the missionaries, and it's something that is not, that people don't learn how to read or write, except for very, very recent endeavors. So the training of the midwives is basically, they have to go every month and say how many birthdays they attended, are there any problems? And so with this idea to produce data, international data on maternal mortality, on attendance rate, on birth, the place of birth, etc. But the midwives do not receive any benefit, and I have an article about this where I say that they are not taught what they can do and something positive, but they're taught what they're not allowed to do. So that's more the focus, and so this control is one of the things that the Organization of Indigenous Doctors, OMIECH, is very vocal about and has been in the past decades. And it's very difficult for Indigenous organizations who go against these international rules, recommendations, where the funding is, to get funding themselves. So I have, during interviews, they told me of several projects they wanted to apply to, UN funded or Mexican government funded, but they didn't, because they were asked that as part of the project, they would have to give all the personal data, for example, all the contact information of the midwives. And they were like, no. Or they would have to do some training and invite some doctors to say, what midwives are not allowed to do. So they refused. And in my dissertation, I have something about this, where I say that in the end, like I describe the difficulty of surviving as an Indigenous organization when you go against, when you have a discourse that is against a mainstream. And so that is what is happening to OMIECH. And I must say that, right before COVID, so in 2019, they started, the midwife section started a project funded by Cultural Survival. And that's basically the only fund available, where they just let Indigenous organizations do what they're good at and carry their political message. And the project is on the question of transmitting the knowledge and reviving the knowledge. And it's still ongoing. But then after that, so you have to live project by project by project. And so briefly on I had this slide, but I'm just going to go. That was like midwives. I said they use the plants, and the plants, because they're just here, and so they know there, and it's in Spanish. So they just the citations say, like, what do we use during a birth? You use the plant, like to clean up the woman if the birth happens in the way. You use your shawl to wrap her up. You just they know all the plants and all the properties of the plants, and so Omniet's struggle is on they have many struggles, but I think the two main are this one, or the use of plants and the defense of traditional midwifery. And so the women and midwife sections I've already introduced. I said they were organizing workshops in different areas of the states. And so here, for example, you can see how the workshop was organized. So Indigenous women, as I said, do not read or write. And so during the training for midwives, for example, I noticed that it was writing form, there were, or even PowerPoint slides. Does not make sense. It's really this top-down structure. And so Omnietch is doing something more like, popular education and community health, where the midwives who participate, and they're midwives, they're young women. This is the picture on the right is from a workshop, from a meeting of midwives organized in the headquarters, but there are also series of workshops organized in the community. So it would be organized in a midwife's house, and everyone, men, women, children, who is interested will come. And so, and they are asked to share their knowledge. And the idea is that you can strengthen it this way. And then when the meeting happens, a couple of midwives from each community are invited, and they share together. So they share the knowledge about massage, about prayers, but also what Omnietch has been doing since 30 years is also sharing the plants, because the climate is so different that in the highlands or in the lowlands, it's not the same plants. And so they will share and exchange plants, basically, and then grow them in their own courtyards. And the way, so this is on the picture on the right in the middle, holding the drawing, is Micaela Bautista, and she has been the coordinator of the Women and Midwives section since she's one of the founders of Omnietch, so since 1985. And so the drawings are the way that the sharing occurs. So she shows, so on the left, I showed a drawing of, so there's a woman sitting on a chair and bleeding, and then there's another woman kneeling next to her and sharing a bowl of plants that looks hot, so we can assume. And so this could be, for example, postpartum hemorrhage, but this also could be a picture of period. This could be several things. And so by asking, what do you see, and okay, so if this is a hemorrhage, what do you do during period cramps? How do you help, etc.? And so this is how discussions occur. And on the picture on the right, where Micaela is holding a drawing, you can see the contrast between a hospital birth on the left and traditional home birth on the right. And so usually the conversation would be, okay, so the woman in the hospital is naked, lying down, and we can see someone just taking the baby out of the vagina. And then on the right is more like the drawing I showed earlier, where the person is holding on to a man, and the midwife is catching the baby. And so this prompts discussion about in which case you have to go to the hospital, how are women treated in the hospital, and so discussions about obstetric violence as well can emerge. What can we do to strengthen our knowledge? And the idea is that if community health, if knowledge in the community is strong about our health, then we can we will not have to go to the hospital, or just they identify the cases in which it's necessary. But then that's what the trainings tell the midwives: in case necessary, you have to transfer, with a list that is growing every time. Like, they have to transfer for more and more reasons, but then sometimes you cannot transfer. And I attended a training it was a training for nurses and doctors, and they were coming from all the states, from very rural health centers, and it was on how to resuscitate a baby. And then one of the person was like, okay, that's all great, we're learning how to do the massage, and you're telling me that, okay, I have to do it in the first minute or the first hour, and then I need a high intensive neonatal care, but there's none. Mine is 7 hours away, and I have an hour to save this baby. So it's also this, you're taking into account what is possible to do, and how people live, and knowing the possibilities that they have or that they don't have. And the fact that the organization Omnietch and others that are organizing with people from the communities, it helps to to think about solutions and concrete solutions, not solutions that are, you know, one size fits all, and you have the same in Malawi and in Mexico and in Morocco. And so after the workshops, the way that this knowledge keeps being transmitted is by publishing little booklets, so boletines, and I put some pictures of some boletines here. So you have one from 1986 or 1989, which is the first one that I found, and then 1993, 1996, and there are still some ongoing. And these are meant, as I said, all elder women don't read or write, but younger women, they're going to school, at least they've completed primary school. And so it's the idea that they can learn also and keep transmitting and use these as tools to discuss with their mother, aunt, grandmother. And it's, I was really interested when I look at the topics that were covered, is that they're from the late 80s or the early 90s, but it's something that's still very relevant today. There's one on masajes, which is so massage. There's one on menstrual problem and very concrete things, how to deal with pain, what is normal, what is not normal, what plants use. And there's also bulletin that was on Indigenous women's rights and what the law says, and a critical analysis about, so knowing what the law says, but also like, okay, this we don't agree with. And so that's these little bulletins are very political, and I think Omich is doing a good job at politicizing these, you know, everyday questions and Indigenous lives, and highlighting the precarity of the lives. And there are two bulletins that are recetarios, which are recipes, and these are shared. These are the ones that are shared during the workshops, and so they also work as a way of strengthening the knowledge. And so that's also, so they one I helped edit in 2015, and the other one was already here. And when I present in research seminars, there are always some researchers interested and they want to know, or even some midwives here in France who want to know about the plants and the plant they used. And I think that's a very important ethical question. Like, they're out there, they're for sale in the museum, but it's the organization that sells them. And then I have access to these, I have them, but am I allowed to share this knowledge? You know, this balance, and I'm being very honest here. It's a question that I want to keep exploring as a researcher. What is the balance between, you know, sharing my research and the knowledge and the will also of the midwives I met, that we want to benefit women. So it doesn't matter if the women in your country, and, you know, being also aware of these colonial dynamics of plant pillage, and so should I be the one sharing the recipes, or you know, I've refused to like send scans or stuff. I'm like, I'm sorry, they're only available in Chiapas. Maybe you'll never go there, but I can't send you a scan, you know. And when I share slides about the plants, I'm just like, no, I can't, you know, I can't allow pictures or stuff. But it's one thing for the organization to share and sell. It's another thing for me to do it. And this this also comes from, so I'm gonna dive into the controversy that happens, or I'm not sure it's a controversy, but the struggle, the fight that happens. So it's the ICG Maya project, which stands for International Cooperative Biodiversity Group. And there were several ICBGs around the world, and this one is the Maya because it was meant to happen in the Lacandon jungle in the south of Chiapas, border with Guatemala. And it started in 1988, and it was a partnership between the University of Georgia and some anthropologists there, ethnobotanists, the Ecosur Research Center in Chiapas, a company, Molecular Nature in Ireland, which is a small pharmaceutical company, and ProMaya, which is an NGO in Chiapas that was created for this project. And here I need to get to my notes to make sure that I get everything correctly and you can understand. So this project raises the question of prior informed consent. it's also a question for anthropologists about extraction of knowledge, and that's what I started reflecting earlier. And just on the slide, there's a picture on the left, which is a publication from Omiech, and it's in Tzotzil and in Spanish, and it's on specifically the whole issue is on this biopiracy in Maya medicine, and it's from 2011, so 10 years later, reflecting on what happened. So I draw on this, and I draw, do I have another source? Yeah, I draw on Nigh an article on this, and I have my sources at the end. I'll share it to you. So the idea, the objective of this project was to create a medicine that was more natural, that was drawing on plants, and at the same time conserving biodiversity and contribute to the economic development of the communities. And so the consortium of the University of Georgia and the pharmaceutical company, it aimed at the official goal was to give indigenous people some control. It's because there has been some cases of biopiracy in Lacan and Jungle, and some big pharmaceutical companies have patented the plants. And so the idea was like, okay, so if this is going to happen, let's have the indigenous people control and get some money so get some benefit out of it. So I mean, I can see this, but the problem is that the agreement, so the consortium obtained the agreement of 46 indigenous communities who were part of the newly created Pro-Maya NGO. 46 indigenous communities is not all communities. It's not. It's barely, maybe 1% of indigenous communities of Chiapas. So this cannot be considered that indigenous people gave their agreement to this project. And so it really raises the question about to who does this knowledge belong? And so Omiech got involved into this. They heard about this project, and they had several meetings with the consortium. And they had at the time a specific branch of the organization that was called COMPICH, which was on midwives, Consejo de Médicos Parteras de Chiapas. And so it was the COMPICH who was in charge of this. And so what they say in their declaration is that indigenous knowledge belongs to every single indigenous person. And this project has not obtained the consent of every single indigenous person. And so they were very active into raising awareness about this project that was going to be signed. And there was a university, and the National Mexican University, there was the Mexican government who had to give the authorizations. And so they were raising red flags around this. And so they said that the prior consultation, which has to happen, had not been respected. And also rose a question about intellectual property of the plants that would be patented. And so in 2000, so about 2 years into this project, the project had started, but had started, as I say, it had started in 1998, and the first step was to obtain the consent, but it still hadn't obtained the consent thanks to this mobilization. And so in 2000, the Mexican Secretary of Natural Resources withdrew from the project, and they rejected the authorization to collect some plants. And so it canceled the project. And then the Mexican Ecosur, the research center, also left the project. And so this is really important because it was a small group. And the counter argument is that Omiech doesn't represent all indigenous communities either. And that's true. They only represent maybe 20 communities. But they were the one who rose awareness about this. And so that was very important for the organization. And that kind of, I think that kind of illustrates how it stands. They how am I going to say? They knew that this would not bring them many friends, and this and having stood up against this would probably have consequences on the viability of the organization, and the fact they would be listed as not fundable or things like that. But I think it's very interesting to see how the role of researchers, because there were two ethnobotanists, Dr. Berlin and Berlin, who were involved in this. And I think that having worked for 30 or 40 years with indigenous communities of Chiapas, they saw this as an opportunity to help help them or to have them strive. But the organization they created, ProMaya, would only have a very small percentage of the benefits, and the majority of the benefits from whatever patent would be done would go to the pharmaceutical company, and then the university, and then indigenous people. So I think as a researcher, I came into this, so I arrived about 10 years after this. So this publication from OMIECH is from 2011. I met them in 2013. So it was very much present, and there was an exhibit on biopiracy in the museum. And so in the article I mentioned about finding common grounds, that was also something very important. When they told me, we don't want you to work on the plants because we've kicked up anthropologists who were working on this, that was very clear. And I have a picture of on the door of one of the Women and Midwife section advisors. It has in big capital letters how for who and what do you do research for. So really have it very clear. Every day I would walk into the office, I would see this, and I think it's a very important reminder, and it contributed to me to develop this critical thinking and how I wanted to do research, and so the how did I say? Sorry. The paper also says, like, all information is a translation from the researcher's point of view, and every representation is also a translation and a construction. So it's the researcher's point of view that you get to see, and everything revolves around how you interpret the data. And there are no objects of study, subject studies do not exist. We're all subject, and we're here, and we're conscious, and like we won't let you publish anything you want. We will find the information is available to us, and we will watch what you're doing. And I think we shouldn't have to have people that politicized and organized in our field. We should have this, but that's not in our training. That hasn't been in my training. At least for me, it was very specific people who I could interact with in my training as an anthropologist around these questions. And so I'm going to conclude. I just wanted to share this little graphic that I made for the article on finding common paths, and how with OMIECH we've tried to move from applied anthropology to a critically engaged anthropology. And so they invited me in their space. I invite them in the conference space. We look for funding together. We publish, and I also sign statements saying, for example, no to the institutionalization of midwifery. Like, midwives need to be independent, and we want the state to recognize them and not control them. Like, we've written responses to articles in the New York Times saying that it's important to train midwives against maternal mortality. And I think that what I say in this paper is that signing with our names matter. It's not just like sharing what organizations do, but also committing, because it's a matter of life and death sometimes. So here are the references, the two articles I mentioned, an article on the bioprospection and the ICG Maya. And if there's any other that I mentioned and that is not here, I would be happy to share them. Thank you.